Good morning. So I was telling my wife that I have a slight nervousness of this lesson, probably due to the fact that this is the third time now that I've attempted to preach it. First time I got sick, the second time snowstorms, I think it was Izzy, came in and disrupted our services. So despite the fact that I've tried twice and have come up short, third time's a charm, but also as I contemplate the topic at hand, it is impossible for me not to feel small and insignificant, and inevitably my words are not going to do justice to the topic that I desire to discuss today. And so for all of you, members here and those visiting alike, I pray that you will listen with grace and seek to find evidence and seek to find power in the things that we are going to consider that will ultimately lead to the glory of our Father in this world today. Before we jump in, Romans is where we're going to eventually wind up, but I want to look at a verse in 1 Peter chapter 3. Excuse me. 1 Peter chapter 3, starting in verse 13. Who is there to harm you if you prove zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, you are blessed. Do not fear their intimidation, and do not be troubled, but sanctify Christ as Lord in your heart, always ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you, yet with gentleness and reverence, and keep a good conscience, so that in the thing which you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ will be put to shame. Set Christ as Lord in your heart, and be ready to give a defense. Some of your translations may say, be ready to, the word that's used behind that word defense, I apologize. The word that is there behind defense is the Greek word apologia. It's where we get our word apologetic or apologize. We're not going to be talking about being able to say sorry. We must never be sorry for who we are as Christians, but in the Greek sense, that word refers to the ability to give a defense for something. Think about it in a court of trial. To be able to stand up and give a defense for that which is been placed on the stand, that which is being examined. What it's really asking us to do is to be willing and ready to be able to present why we believe something is true. Why do you have hope as a Christian? Why have you devoted yourself to this life? At the beginning of this year, we set aside a theme for us, ignite. To ignite in our walk with God, to be filled. We're focusing especially on that phrase, did not our hearts burn within us? We want to burn the glory and radiate the majesty of God through our lives, through our words, through our actions, through our marriages. And we began that with a view of igniting our love for God. Taken from Deuteronomy chapter 6. Hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. If that's where we're beginning, I also mentioned that there are some things that need to be added to that. For a fire to burn, you need multiple things coming together. You need a spark. You need something to provide that initial source of heat. You need fuel for it to burn, and you need oxygen. And so what I've planned throughout the course of this year to try to fuel this desire to ignite are some lessons that I hope will help us to fan the flames, so to speak. We started off this month talking about igniting our love for God, but why? In fact, the question that some have come to ask is, why would you love something even if it doesn't exist? I want to go ahead and say the title of this lesson, Proof of the Existence of God, is a bit of a misnomer. There have been many who have confessed, if you could prove to me God exists, then I would certainly love Him, then I would certainly be compelled to listen to Him. The problem is what they're asking for, in the sense that they're asking for it, simply doesn't exist. Not in the way that many people think of proof today, which is the idea of 100% undeniable evidence. There is no other possible explanation. If I can come up with another possible explanation, then that is not solid enough proof. Now, the problem with that is, this is an illogical view of the word proof that doesn't hold up doesn't hold up in even lesser arguments than something as powerful and big and life-changing as the presence and existence of God. I'll give you an example of that. Julius Caesar. I would say everyone here probably agrees Julius Caesar was a real person. He was emperor, or probably more accurate, dictator of the Roman Empire, which existed some 2,000 years ago. Do we have evidence of that? Well, yes, we have countless documents and artifacts, many things that illustrate this is a real thing. So that is therefore 100% undeniable, except it's not. It's not 100% undeniable because there have become attacks on the evidence that says maybe this is not true. I'm going to lean real hard on some air quotes here. This qualified bachelor of history or anthropology has recently come out and noted that the Roman Empire is nothing more than a figment of the imagination of the Spanish Inquisition, and likens it to someone in the year 3000 looking back on North America and saying that we were ruled by this magical kingdom of Walt Disney. Now, is there evidence for someone in the year 3000 to look back and say there was this magical kingdom that was ruled by a guy named Walt Disney and his puppet, a mouse? Yes, there is plenty of evidence for that. But given our definition, our current definition of evidence, we have another explanation for Rome. So at very best, we just can't be certain if Rome really exists. Except we can be certain. We can be very certain because we have the ability to do something. That is, we have the ability to reason and examine the evidence logically. And when we do that, we understand very quickly that the things that this author has brought up fall short on many different levels. So getting back to our topic at hand, can we know for certain that there is a God? Yes, because we have evidences. Now, this word proof or evidence classically has meant something which helps to establish a fact or something which helps to establish truth about a statement. Is there proof of the evidence of God? Unfortunately, for many atheists in the world today, the answer to that question is no, because they're ascribing this illogical view of evidence. You have to give me 100% proof that has no other possible explanation that can ever be dreamed up. But for many in the world, Christian and agnostic alike, it's not just that there's proof, it's that there's unbelievable amounts of proof. And that's what I hope to talk about. And I do hope to be as brief as possible with this because we're going to dig into some arguments today that I think can benefit us. We're going to dig into many more as we go through the course of this year, but I recognize that specifically for this lesson, these arguments are going to lean upon philosophy, and there's going to be a lot of those that's not their favorite thing to study. They don't wake up and go, I can't wait to just dig into some philosophical questions and reasoning. So we're going to try to be brief with this, but I think it's important for us to know these arguments. I think it's important for us to know all the evidence that we have been given for several reasons. One, because we're a believer of the Bible. And as believers of the Bible, we come to recognize that one thing God has tasked believers of Him with is being ready to give a defense. Being ready to go to someone and say, hey, here's a reason why I believe in God. Now, the evidences we're going to look at today, these are common evidences. Some people argue these are the best evidences to start with. I'm going to say I don't think that's the case. I think like Paul on Mars Hill, every single one of us needs to recognize who we're talking with and try to determine where is the best place to start. But for many, some of these philosophical questions that we're going to examine and arguments that we're going to consider are a great place to open a door, and that's what I hope to be able to prepare us for. I also hope to help to make us more confident. Whenever we go into a world that disassociates reality from God, sometimes we shrink back. I don't know that I can tell somebody why I believe in Christ. I don't know that I have a great answer. And even sometimes fearful, I don't know if I'm around that person, they're going to change my thinking and I'm going to become atheist. I'm not going to believe in God anymore. I want us to be more confident in the God that we serve and be able to articulate that and express that to others, helping someone who maybe is on the fence. Helping someone who is trying to reconcile the fact that, I do believe that maybe there is something bigger than me out there, but the wide world around me just is filled with unbelief or downright rejection. And so I want to be able to get us to a place where we can assist with that. But I also want us to understand one more thing before we jump into these lessons, into these thoughts. We have to understand that these two terms that I've already used here, atheist and agnostic, they're different. They're just as different as the term unbelief and rejection. And sometimes we fail to see that. An atheist is someone who outright rejects that there is any sort of transcendent power. Not just that there is no God, there is nothing greater than what we see with our own eyes. If there is something that is bigger than us, if there is some sort of alien life form out there that is smarter than us, it is just something in the evolutionary chain that has occurred just like we have, but there is nothing behind that. There is nothing mystical or supernatural going on there. An agnostic, on the other hand, is someone who says, I believe in something. I just don't know that there's enough evidence to determine what it is. It's hard for me not to look at the world around and say something had to have done this. It's hard for me not to consider some of the things that we're going to consider this morning and say, something had to have been there, but I don't know if it's the God that these Christians are talking about, or you have the Muslims on the other side of the world. You got Buddhists and Hindus, and then maybe it's just something that none of us know. I don't know how you can ever determine which one is right. And so because of that, it's not that I reject, it's just that I don't know that I believe like you believe. So we need to understand these terms because they can help us to understand who we're talking to. We also need to understand that the evidence that we're going to discuss is not evidence that has been provided to us just to sweep everybody off their feet and to lock them into the same view that we have. That's not what God has created. That's not what God has left us with. Instead, it is an opportunity for us to share our worldview, that is the way that we see the world around us, which is viewed through the lens of God as creator and the Bible as His Word and Jesus as His gift to mankind to save them from where they are. We want to be able to express that to others in a way that is reasonable and persuasive, other than when someone has a question, says, I just don't know how I believe that. How do you believe that? Our first answer is to open this up and say, because the Bible says so. That is a great answer for some. I told you at the beginning of this, we're going to have to approach everybody different. But for someone who says, I don't believe in supernatural, I don't believe in miracles, I don't believe in a God that created the heavens and the earth, this doesn't mean anything. So how do we open a door with that person? Is there a way? Do we just give up and walk away and say, well, there's no hope for them? In a time when it looked completely hopeless for us, God went through great lengths to draw us nearer to Him. As those who follow His Son Jesus in the way in which He did that, I think we should have a desire ourselves to do the same thing, even for those that we might deem to be hopeless. So I want to get into some arguments that we're going to discuss here today. And the first one seems kind of simple at first, but gets to be a little complex as you go through it. We're going to try to make the best of it. But it is this Aristotelian proof, which is oftentimes called causality, the first cause, and it is simply described, I believe in God because change occurs, because change happens. And we see that all the time. You look around, you see change happening all the time. Just a few months ago, we watched the leaves fall from the trees as autumn came, as the season of autumn came in. We see as all of the snow fell, that the level of snow on the ground begins to grow. As it melts, puddles grow in size. They are constantly changing. One of my favorite examples of change is coffee. Maybe because I am a huge lover of coffee, but when my coffee cup, as I pour hot coffee into it in my office, it's going to change later into cold coffee. Change it happens all around us. You can't deny it, except unless you are the Greek philosopher Parmenides. Parmenides looked at everything, and he actually starts his logic from a very sound place. He says, you know what? His famous saying is, from nothing, nothing comes. You can't get something from nothing. You can't just magically create something out of thin air. From nothing, nothing comes. And so if we were to use our illustration, in fact, I want to, if you'll allow me, I want to do a little illustration here. I know not everybody's going to be able to see this, but let's just go ahead and witness witness the change happening in front of us. If you can see this, especially those up close, as I pour this cup of coffee, it is hot. There's steam coming out of that. If I spill that on me right now, it's going to burn. If I try to guzzle that down, I'm not going to be able to speak the rest of this lesson. Change happens. Parmenides, explain this hot coffee in a few minutes when it's grown cold. Well, he's going to look at that and say, right now, is there the existence of cold coffee? There is not, Parmenides. There is no cold coffee. That is a cup of hot coffee indeed. He would say, well, you can't get something from nothing. If no cold coffee exists, then later on, when cold coffee is there, it couldn't have happened because then you got something from nothing. And so, at best, you're just deceived. In other words, he might say, you just can't believe your lying eyes. Now, long before the Wachowski brothers brought us the movie Matrix, which basically said the same thing, everything you see is an illusion, that's what Parmenides was seeing. This is all just a big illusion. Change doesn't really happen. And this went on for about 100 years until a man by the name of Aristotle comes along and says, that's not quite right. He goes, Parmenides, I think you've made a mistake. Now, he's speaking after the fact. Parmenides is dead by this point. But he says, I believe he's made a mistake. Change most certainly does occur, and we can witness it. He would say it is true that right now we only have a cup of hot coffee. But what Aristotle began to recognize is every substance that we can see, everything that we can experience, and even things that we cannot experience, is made up of their actual state and their potential state. And he would argue change is what happens when something moves from its actual state to its potential. So right now, the coffee, it has some potentials. It has the potential to be cold. It also has the potential to make you alert. Now, if you don't believe that, ask Brad to come over to your next outing because he's going to show up with Death Wish coffee, the most caffeinated coffee in the world. Cut it in half when you make it. I guarantee you that's a lesson to learn. But it's not actually making me more alert right now. Something has to change. It has to change its location from inside that cup to inside my body. Change happens. And so he says that there are different sorts of potentials. He went on to redefine change as the movement. We are moving something from its actual state to its potential state. The most famous way that he described this is with water. Water in its actual state of liquidity is fluid and you can move it. But if you change it by freezing it into a solid, into ice, you have activated its potential. It had the potential to be a solid. It also has the potential to be a gas. If you heat it up super hot, it's going to turn into steam and take its gaseous form. And so what he realized from this, as he followed this logic along, is that every time change occurs, something has to act on it. Nothing changes without something acting or causing it to change. For example, this hot coffee here, it's going to change as the room temperature around it is colder, and it's going to activate its potential of being cold coffee. If I were to pick that up and try to show you what all it's doing, my clumsiness is going to change its actuality of being in that cup into the potential of staining my clothes or being poured into my lap. And so what Aristotle concluded was this: for change to happen, there must by nature always be a changer, something that causes change. This is where it gets its name, causality. Oftentimes things change because something else changes, is what he noticed. Again, we could look at that coffee and say, well, what made it cold? Well, the room got cold. And because the room got cold and the air was colder in the room, it made the coffee cold. Let's take it further back. Let's just follow this back in history. What made the room colder? Well, my boys went outside, and they have an ability to seem to always forget to shut the door when they go outside, and it's cold outside, so the cold air came in. Well, let's continue to follow that. Why did the boys go outside? They went outside because they were making a lot of noise, and my potential of getting aggravated and spanking them was rising. Their potential of getting that spanking was beginning to become actualized, and they recognized we need to go outside to avoid Dad's wrath. Something acted over and over and over again in this sequence. In fact, what that is called is a hierarchy or a hierarchical system. And Aristotle Aristotle came up with this, 350 BCE. He's saying, go back and follow the steps backwards. Something's always acting upon another. And in his mind, he said, we can just do this forever. We can go back for infinity, always finding something acting. And then as he thought about that, he said, no, we can't. And here's why. Parmenides. Parmenides wasn't wrong. You can't get something from nothing. From nothing, nothing comes. He said, that's right. So if this could go back for infinity, another way of saying that is an infinite regress. He said, if an infinite regress is true, then nothing would ever come into existence. There has to be a starting point, in other words. There has to be a beginning. That's what he recognized. And so the beginning of this first member, it has to have some specific characteristics. One of which is it can't be something that has potential. It must be purely actual. It has the ability to change other things, but it itself can never be changed. And thus, and by the way, Aristotle viewed the word change with the word move. He named this product, or this first member, the Unmoved Mover. You might think about it in the sense of a train. If you're standing at the very back of a train, when it starts moving, you see that the back car moves, you understand the car in front of it began pulling on it, and the car in front of that began pulling on it. But eventually you get, and I understand this is a crude example, but you get to the front of the train and you realize there's nothing pulling the front car. It has the ability to pull itself and to pull all the cars behind it. That's kind of what Aristotle came to understand. And so, if we were to ask Aristotle, how did this coffee cup get here? How did this cup of coffee, why is this cup of coffee, does this cup of coffee exist? By the way, this is philosophy for those of you that just, what is philosophy? It is the question, why does my cup of coffee exist? It is the examination of what we take for common sense and oftentimes just stupidity. Why would you even ask that question? Another thing to note about philosophy is it's amoral. There's no such thing as philosophy is evil. Philosophy is simply a study of the way that we think. And so oftentimes we hear people when they go to college and we say, make sure you steer clear of philosophy. We'll make sure that we understand what we're saying and understand what we need to be warning. For all of our young ones that are going to be facing higher education someday soon, understand that from a higher education, if you take philosophy, you're taking philosophy from a worldview that says, I don't believe in miracles. I don't believe in the supernatural, and therefore I don't believe in God, and I don't believe in the Bible, and I want you to have the same worldview that I have. Philosophy is not evil, but there is such a thing as having a good philosophy and having a bad philosophy. You need to have a proper, realistic, logical worldview that says, here's the evidence. And as someone that is devoting myself to learning, this is the reason we go to higher education, because I want to be scholarly, I'm going to follow the evidence where the evidence is leading me. So if we were to ask Aristotle, the philosopher, Aristotle, here's my cup of coffee. He would say, yes, it is. Why does your cup of coffee exist? I might say, well, I poured it out of the carafe, and that's why it's there. Okay, why did it exist in the carafe? Well, because we put water in the back of the coffee maker and we put coffee grounds on top, and we would follow this list back. And eventually we're going to end up at the sink where the water comes from, and then at the river, and then at the ocean, and into the rain. But we get to the point where we're saying, well, how did we get water? Well, 2 hydrogen molecules bonded with an oxygen molecule. I think I got that right. Practiced that one a lot. Well, why did that happen? Because they're subatomic particles. Something changed them. They had the potential to be formulated in this way to bond. They had the potential for that, and something changed them, so that was actualized, and they produced this product, and they come into existence. Aristotle came up with this. That's the other thing I want you to take from this. This is 350 years before the days of Jesus. When you think of the apostles who followed, you think of a bunch of dumb fishermen. I'm not saying everybody thinks in the days of Jesus on the level of Aristotle, but they weren't as stupid as we sometimes try to make them out to be. In fact, the level of reasoning and logic that is going on in the days of Aristotle, not just rivals, it surpasses the level of reasoning and logic that goes on in our own day, in our higher educations, where we argue and can't even come to a conclusion of whether or not a person is male or female. There is some very good logic that is there, that has been passed down through history, that says, look, there's something that caused all this. What is it? Well, in the year 1250, the 13th century, a man by the name of Thomas Aquinas, he is a Catholic monk. He is a fantastic study, if you ever have the time to read about the life of this man. He comes and he approaches Aristotle's reasoning and logic. Aristotle, by the way, is a theist. He believes in a greater power, but not in any God that we would recognize. He comes to this and he says, look, Aristotle was onto something. And this cause that he has brought to our attention, this we shall call God. Now, he's caught a lot of flack over that. Because whenever someone says, I can prove Thomas Aquinas was wrong, what they typically prove is that nothing in nature and nothing in Aristotle's proof of this unmoved mover suggests that this God exists. Well, that's a straw man argument, because Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas, neither one was proving the God of the Bible. They were proving that there is a source that is unchanged, an unchanged changer, an unmoved mover, which causes all things that exist to come into existence and causes the change that we take for granted, like this cup of hot coffee that's now probably warmish coffee, to change. And he said that source, whatever you want to call it, we call it God, exists, and it's real. I want you to open your Bibles to Psalm 19 for a moment. In not the exact same words, but in much the same way, David says the heavens are telling of the glory of God. Their expanse is declaring the work of his hands. Day to day pours forth speech. Night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words. Their voice is not heard. My point this morning is that for centuries, people have just simply looked with reason and logic into the world around us and said, there is something that is bigger than this. There is something that had to have started this, that had to have played a hand in the existence of all that we see. The mere fact, somebody says, why do you believe in God? I'm not saying you're going to convince a lot of people saying because my hot coffee became cold. But the mere fact that my hot coffee can change to cold demands an answer. What causes all of this to take place? Many men before us, and I hope us today, had the nerve to stand up and say, God. Most people are going to get on board with this. Even within the scientific worldview, even within atheism and agnosticism, they're going to get on board with this. Another article I want you to consider, this is from the Live Science magazine. Surprise, the Big Bang isn't the beginning of the universe anymore. So mathematically, we have been saying we can go back to the nanoseconds following the Big Bang and the creation of all life as we know it. We can know with a very sure, reasonable concern that this is probably what happened just mere nanoseconds after that. But science has never been comfortable going beyond that because, after all, we can't see back that far. We can't see back to nanoseconds after it either. We don't have any problem going there. And lo and behold, in our hubris, we finally said, you know what, let's go ahead and cross that bridge. Let's go back before the Big Bang occurred, and let's find out what we see. Well, here's the rising theory that is gaining in population. Inflation accomplishes this by postulating a period prior to the hot Big Bang where the universe was dominated by a large cosmological constant, or something that behaves similarly. What they have come to find is that whatever it was that set off this Big Bang was enormous in size, and was singular and of great power and was constant and unchanging. It's the same thing that Aristotle came up with, 2,300 years ago. Came up with the exact same notion. Again, if you're speaking to an atheist, you present them this view, they're probably not going to be content to say, well, that right there, that cosmological constant, yeah, that's a God. They're probably not going to be content with that. Although there are examples. One to consider is a man by the name of Antony Flew, who was a famously devout atheist, argued and debated with many others who believed in creation over evolution. One thing that set Antony Flew apart from others is Antony Flew is a scholar. And he said, I will always commit myself to following the evidence wherever it may lead, despite my biases, despite my presuppositions. And after debating for years and having countless evidences thrown up in his face, he finally came to the conclusion, there's no way my prior view of rejecting any form of transcendent power can be true. Now, he has never become a believer in the God of the Bible. But Antony Flew, a devout atheist, became a devout theist. There is something that is greater. That is a place where these sorts of arguments can assist us in helping people to see there is common ground. We can find a way to talk about these things and examine the evidence without just automatically hating each other and not being able to discuss one another if we just look at things reasonably and logically. Again, it doesn't point people to the Bible, but it opens a door. And once that door is open, there are other arguments we can continue to go along with. This one is called the teleological proof. And what this argument really notices is that unchangeable source that we just got through discovering that causes things to come into existence oftentimes does so. In fact, primarily, most of the time, it does so with, at the very least, the illusion of design. And the way that argument is phrased is, I believe, important. The illusion of design. Because whether or not you believe design is actually evident, you can't deny the fact that it seems like it is. When you look at the created world, when you look at those things which have come into existence, you can't help but not see that there are at least something in them that looks like it was designed that way. An excellent example of that is a sermon that was preached here by Brother Robbie Bellwood just several months ago. I encourage you, if that's not on our YouTube page, it's definitely on our website. Go back and listen to that as he talked about the great examples of design that you find just in the created world. Now, predating Robbie by just a few years is this man, William Paley, in 1802. He came up to a similar conclusion in his book, Natural Theology, and he created what many of us have probably become aware of, the watch and the watchmaker analogy. And it goes in different forms, but primarily you're walking through the woods and you find one of these laying on the ground. You pick it up, and as you examine it, you notice that, hey, that's got some sort of transparent material on top where I can see inside of it, and inside of it are these two hands that are made of a material that contrasts the background, so they're very, very visible. I can make them out very quickly, and it's got all these little hash marks around it that coincide with the moving of the sun around, the moving of the earth around the sun. Let's really take it back. And that helps me to determine time. It's almost like it was made for me to be able to use that. And it's got these leather bands that are comfortable, and I can put it on my wrist. Wow. I wonder what all had to happen over millennium to bring this thing into just chance occurrence so that I would find it and it's made just for me. We would look at that viewpoint and go, that seems a little bit illogical, because after all, we know what that is. It's a watch, and watches demand a watchmaker. But how much more design do we find in life, in mankind, in the animal, and in the planetary worlds, in the cosmos around us? Again, Psalms 19. God's creation is shouting to us, saying something needs to have your attention. But if design is present, that's what we're focusing on. If design is present, then it really, there's only two things that we can possibly take from that. One is either in the face of repeated astronomical odds, a freak cosmic coincidence has occurred. And we could fill this board up with astronomical odds all day long. Here's three that I just find absolutely fascinating. Whatever it was that began the universe, again, I know that I'm talking to a crowd that believes in God and in the beginning, let there be light. But if you're talking to a crowd, whatever it is that is the origin of this universe, if its strength changed by merely a factor of 1 in 10 to the 60th power, I've done lessons before where I tried to say the names of those numbers, and I'm not even going to attempt it. 1 in the 10 to the 60th power, if it changes, whether stronger or weaker, one, it is an explosion that completely pushes everything out so far apart that nothing can exist. Or two, it's so weak that it causes itself to implode back on itself. This is what the scientific world has deemed as a certainty. We know this for certain. If it changes just this fractional amount, if the force of gravity changed by a strength of 1 in 10 to the 40th power, stars like our sun would either pull a planet like ours into a position where we would burn up and it would be a hot gaseous mess, or push it out far enough that it would be too cold for us to be able to produce anything. Life would end. Or if just the nuclear force of the atom that holds it together, if you were to change that by plus or minus 5%, life is not possible. That's just three. We could go for days noticing things that seem like this was designed to perfectly fit the reality we live in. But you know what? It's just a cosmic chance. Just happened. To steal a quote from Jurassic Park, life just found a way. That's one option. The other option is what Paley came to the conclusion of: design demands a designer. The source of unchanging and pure power, pure actual power, began everything, demonstrated signs of intelligence which mankind has not and will not ever rise to. And in creating things to come into existence, designed them to work exactly as it intended. Again, design demands a designer. That's the teleological proof. The last one we'll look at this morning is the morality proof. And unfortunately, this one can be summed up. What is right and what is wrong? Why do you believe in God? Well, why do you believe things are right? Why do you believe things are wrong? Throughout history, there's been a sense of that, a sense of morality. Where does that come from? Unfortunately, we live in a postmodern world. What that means is somewhere in the 18th century, we are going to experience what is described as an intellectual enlightenment. And it seems specifically in architecture and art, but it makes its way into philosophy and worldviews. And what it's going to culminate in is a lack of trust in things which have been held to be permanent. So governments, can't believe governments. And religions, can't believe religions. You got to make things, you got to come and make your own truths. We see that often today. You can't lie, you cannot deny that we're still impacted by that. By the mere fact that how many of us still go, absolutely not, I don't care how much evidence is given. If a government says it, I don't believe it. But that's really not the biggest transgressor of postmodernism. The biggest ones are these: relativism, individualism, which became known as expressive individualism, and really today with the state of our worldly affairs, hyper-expressive individualism. And then also, all of these are really just forms of humanism, that mankind is the greatest thing that ever was and ever will be. We don't have time, obviously, to get into all of the details of these, but when it comes to morality, and we ask somebody, why do you believe something is right and wrong? We've got to understand a few things about that. One is we're not talking about law. That's very quickly where this argument goes to. Laws change, so therefore it is relative. It just depends on who's in control. We can see that as very, very obvious. There was a time when you want your kid to sit in the back seat of the car and do jumping jacks while you go 60 miles an hour down the road. That is perfectly fine. It's your prerogative. Do that today, pretty sure you're going to get pulled over. It's against the law. Why? Because a segment of our population in charge of making laws said we think that should be wrong. Why? Because it goes against what we deem to be moral. Where did that come from? Where did it come from that you got this notion that something could be moral or immoral? There's two options. One is from our nurture. And that is the most common argument when it comes to relativism. You think something's wrong because you were raised in a society that says it was wrong. You think stealing is wrong because generally we look down on stealing. People come to take stuff from us. We're going to call the police. That's not okay. You go and take something from somebody else, you're going to feel pretty bad about that if you have any sorts of concept of what that is going on there, of what's happening in that moment. But if you didn't live in this culture, you might not think so bad about stealing, such as if you were to be raised in the Norse culture during the time of the raiding Vikings. They made all of their livelihood. They got animals and they got food and they got gold and plunder by going and stealing it from other people. You were raised from childhood to think stealing is not all that bad until they show up at your house and they're going to steal your stuff. And then you're raised to pull your sword out and defend because this is not okay. Why? Why are things wrong? Nurture does not answer the question. Nurture does not imply, because even in raised in a society that says raiding is perfectly fine for us, whenever someone comes to raid us, we have a great issue. There's an injustice going. So the other answer, again, is still a popular quote, "Baby, you were born this way. This is how you were made." And you don't believe me? If I go around here and start pinching the cheeks of all these little babies and taking their food away from them, they're going to say an injustice has happened, and their moms are probably going to be mad and hurt me. So why do they have that notion? Don't feed me, I'm going to scream and cry. Take my toys away from me, I'm going to scream and cry. Why are we designed this way? There's no answer for that. Outside of the Bible, but there is a reasonable and logical conclusion. And that is, if we are born or if we are created this way, then where does it come from if not from an unchanging source of pure and intelligent power that has designed us to be this way? By this thinking, there's a few things that we can come to understand. One, this unchanging changer is pure. When I say pure, I'm not saying holy like we oftentimes think of. It is, this unchanging changer is always actualized. He is everything, or it is, I should say, in the course of how we're describing it to those that may not believe in the God of the Bible, this unchanging changer is everything that it possibly could be all the time. There is no change that can be made to it, but it in itself changes other things. We also understand this unchanging changer is unbelievably intelligent when we consider the amount of design that is put into the very smallest molecules and particles of our existence, into the grand scale of the universe around us. And whatever this unchanging changer is, it is moral. It has imparted a sense of right and wrong, and this we call God. Again, as I said, this reason and this logic has led notorious atheists and agnostics to, at the very least, become theists, to become believing in a power that transcends man. And as I also said, everything that we've looked at, it does not prove this. But it is a door. It is a way to open communication. And what I hope to consider as we go throughout the rest of this year, and as we add to this fire that I pray is going to ignite and burn within us, is that there are things that I can do, there are evidences that I can use to prove this. I can tell you why it's reasonable and logical to believe that this unchanging changer is, in fact, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of our Bibles. And I can tell you why it is reasonable and logical to believe that we can trust the word of this Bible because we know how we got it. And so I hope to consider some of those things. But really, as we wrap this up, I recognize that I'm talking to a group of people that believes already in the existence of God. Your philosophy or your worldview already says, I believe in that unchanging changer, and I believe that unchanging changer left us these words. He interacted with the mankind that He created, and He gave us His Son as a sacrifice for the sins that we've committed so that we could have hope through His grace. What I want to close with this morning, is your life consistently matching up to your philosophy? In other words, you may talk the talk, but do you walk the walk? So let's look one more time at Romans chapter 1 and we'll be done. We're going to go back just a little bit farther to verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor Him as God or give thanks. But they became futile in their speculations. Their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and exchanging the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man and of birds and four-footed animals and crawling creatures. In mankind's hubris, we have went back to the beginning of time and said we can not only see that and know what happened there, but we can go back farther. I think it is equally hubris as Christians to look at a passage like Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 23, and go, that's talking about Gentiles who worshiped idols. It can't talk about me. What did he say in those passages? Ryder, would you care to come take this? What did he say in those passages? Other than it was made evident, the knowledge of God was made evident to them. They knew the knowledge of God. They thought themselves wise, and yet they were darkened in their hearts. They were foolish. What that tells me is it's not enough to just know God exists. It's not enough to just know that He is the God of this Bible. It's not enough to just know He is the God that loves me. It's not enough to just know He is the God who has offered to save me through the blood of His Son, Jesus. If you're here this morning and you know these things, I hope that you will be wise and that you will let the God that is unchanging transform you to make your potential of being an adopted child of His through the blood of Jesus Christ actualized to save you from your sins. If you have done that today, I hope that you will be wise in the way that you walk. Being prepared to give a defense for why you have hope, being prepared to give a defense for God and for Jesus and for His Word, but not becoming foolish and thinking because I have the knowledge, I'm good. We have God. We have His grace. If you have fallen from that, or if you have not yet attained to it by the sacrifice of Jesus, we want to assist you with that. Can we do that this morning? If so, let's talk about it together. Come forward right now as we stand.